Friends, would you please join me in welcoming today Reverend Gail Henderson-Belsito. Oh, you don't need to.
Thank you. Good morning. I want to say thank you to Knox Presbyterian Church for inviting me to stand before you this morning and bring this year's Tom York lecture. It is a high honor to stand here and share with you just a few of my thoughts about hope. I am not a best-selling author. I'm not a viral social media influencer. I am a woman, a wife, a mother, a sister, a daughter, a preacher, a pastor, a student of life and love and hope. And I am convinced that without hope, we are, in fact, hopeless. I believe with all that I am that hope is what brought us to this time and place as a species, and hope is what will carry us forward and help us to survive and thrive as humans on this third rock from the sun. When I say the word hope, I mean more than the light and fluffy kind of hope that longs for my favorite kombucha or sensitive toothpaste to be on sale at the supermarket. I want us to think of a thicker, richer, stronger kind of hope than that. The kind of hope that looks at our fear-mongering, gun-protecting rather than people-protecting nation and remains convinced that this is not the only way that we can live. The kind of hope that looks at the climate crisis that is affecting every part of creation and is convinced that this is not the only way we can live and another kind of climate is still possible. The kind of hope that cannot fully imagine what this nation could be if we stopped hating and fearing each other, if we stopped making life so expensive that hardworking people have to live in cars or tents or other unhealthy places. The kind of hope that doesn't have an answer for every question, but persists anyway. The kind of hope that sees reason for despair, but does not give up or give in. That's the kind of muscular, hardworking, hard-fought hope that I want to talk to you about this morning. Are you with me? Yes. To be clear, I will always hope for good parking spaces and flights that leave on time, but most days my hope is deeper and wider and more expansive than that. And I hope that by the time you leave here late this afternoon, I'm kidding, you will have a new understanding of and relationship with hope. We don't have enough time to walk and talk our way through the entire history of humanity and hope. So let's start about 400 years ago. Let's take a journey together, an ocean journey. We won't be on a seaborne cruise ship. I've been on a seaborne cruise ship. If you have a chance to get on a seaborne cruise ship, you should definitely do that. We won't be on a celebrity cruise. We won't be on a Disney ship either. The ship we are interested in looks more like this. It could be a slave ship called Glory that set sail originally from Liverpool, England, picked up 764 people, 764 human siblings from the port of West Central Africa and landed at the island of St. Kitts, which is in the Caribbean, which has the Caribbean Sea on its western coast and the Atlantic Ocean on its eastern coast. Or we could consider the slave ship Charlotte, the name of my home city, a ship that sailed round trip from Charleston, South Carolina to Africa and returned with 40 enslaved people on board. As the barbaric practice of transporting enslaved people became more established, ships' documents became less and less specific. The name of the African port began to be left out, and travel documentation simply said Africa, port unspecified. Landing place, Florida, port unspecified. The number of enslaved people that left that original port, not included. The number of those lost at sea, not included. The passengers on the Glory, on the Charlotte, were packed onto ships that looked like that. Shocked, terrified, chained together. Forced to lay in blood, sweat, vomit, urine, feces, and every other bodily emission, they did not lay on air mattresses. Millions of Africans were transported across the ocean in indescribably horrendous conditions. Some accounts say that the ships could be smelled before they could be seen. Unspeakable, inexcusable, unfathomable. There were hundreds of slave ships and more than 36,000 such voyages. Anywhere from a couple dozen enslaved people per ship to more than 500 souls kidnapped, held captive, sometimes for weeks, in ports before spending between 10 and 25 weeks at sea. Men, women, children, toddlers, babies born on those ships, all crammed together in quarters below deck during the night and allowed up on deck during the day. Understandably, many decided that they would end their lives at sea. Some refused to eat, starving themselves to death in sorrow and despair. Rather than continue a journey to an unimaginable destination, others threw themselves into the open sea, chained together, some with babies in arms. But most of them, somewhere around 85% of them, of us, survived the journey. Of the more than 12 million people stolen, more than 10.5 survived. Those noble people were torn away from lives and villages and families and culture and history and music and dance. Their history did not start on those slave ships. They left lives of food and dance and mathematics and science and religious practices all their own. But some way, somehow, after they were tossed and turned in the horrors of those slave vessels in whatever languages they thought and spoke, with whatever religious understandings, spiritual understandings they embraced, they had an unbreakable will, ability, and strength to survive. Despite the horrors of how they were treated, they were still able to sit up and stand up and emerge from those ships with pride and dignity and nobility and courage and stamina and hope. Some way, somehow, my ancestors survived horror beyond horror, whippings, torture, unrelenting work, and somehow, in spite of all that, they held on. They gave birth to children, some born of love, many born of rape. They raised those children. They raised each other's children when that terrible practice of the separation of families was reenacted over and over and over again. They listened to and watched and endured the inhumane treatment of people who thought they could own them, and yet they pressed on. They held on to hope. It was and still is inexplicable hope that led those enslaved people away from plantations and rice fields and cotton fields out to hush harbors where they tended to their wounded and weary souls with song and dance, stories and sermons, reminding themselves that they had innate worth, even though those who thought they owned them denied their value. Nevertheless, hope. And they must have thought, if I can't make it, my children or my grandchildren or their children after them, someone, some way, somehow is going to be free, because this cannot be all that is. This cannot be all that is. Along came big dreamers like Harriet Tubman, and the Underground Railroad began its work in delivering the enslaved to freedom. My impossibly courageous and hopeful people were able to say, nevertheless, I will send these, my beloved children, in the middle of the night out into a future I cannot yet imagine or see. You have the Freedom Center celebrating the Underground Railroad right here in Cincinnati. Have you been there? Have you read and heard and learned the stories of those people who didn't know each other, who didn't know what lay on the other side of the Mason-Dixon line, the other side of trap doors and basements, the other side of rivers, but because of hope, they helped transport enslaved people out of bondage. In spite of all that was right in front of them and all around them, they took every risk, including risking their own lives in the name of hope. As they met, fed, hid, and passed along, each person running for their freedom, they had to have thought, even for this one soul, there must be a future, something bigger and better and more expansive than this cruel system of enslavement. That was hope on the move. Last December, in her Patreon community, Sonia Renee Taylor talked about the mathematics of ancestry. She talked about the fact that if she went back 12 generations, approximately 400 years, there would be 4,094 grandparents who had to survive before her, who had to leave from that castle in Ghana, that place referred to as the point of no return in slave ships. And she asked herself with tears running down her beautiful cheeks, how dare I give up? How dare I lose hope? In his book, My Grandmother's Hands, Resmaa Menakem writes about somatic, embodied, epigenetic trauma and suffering. He wrote about how black bodies and white bodies and police bodies have all been traumatized, and how we all carry trauma in us and with us in different ways. He writes about epigenetic trauma, which refers to the ways in which trauma experienced by the pregnant parent and the impregnating parent can, according to one definition, leave a chemical mark on a person's genes, which can be passed down to future generations. This mark doesn't cause a genetic mutation, but it does alter the mechanism by which the gene is expressed. The alteration is not genetic, it says, but epigenetic. So although it doesn't change the gene, epigenetic trauma acts on the gene. What does that mean? Epigenetic trauma and the traumatic responses that are passed down from generation to generation can affect how we respond to fear, to anger, and even noise. It can affect how safe or unsafe we feel around people who look different from us, people who have authority over us, and people who don't look like us and also have authority over us. Menakem and so many others speak and know that it will take intentional work to heal the legacy of epigenetic trauma on all of us, because it affects all of us. But what if there's such a thing as epigenetic hope? What if hope can be passed along from generation to generation? What if hope resides in our bones along with intergenerational trauma? What if our bodies and our minds and our spirits and our souls can hold both? And what if hope can help us heal from the trauma and fear? What if merely having hope is the first step in creating a better world and a new life? What if hope empowers and enables us to take that first step, to make the first move toward a new life and a new world? My parents, Otis Henderson and Eleanor Elliott, joined the Great Migration from the South to the North in the first half of the 20th century. My father, God rest his beautiful soul, was born and raised in Lawrence, South Carolina. He was born in 1921. I cannot imagine the horrors he saw and the indignities he endured in small-town South Carolina in the 1920s and 30s. In his 20s, my father served in this nation's segregated army in Burma, now Myanmar, during World War II. One of his brothers was an instructor of the Tuskegee Airmen. They served a country that segregated them in war and in peace, although I wonder if there ever really has been peace for people who look like me in this country. When he returned from the war, my father settled in Brooklyn, New York, where he lived with two of his sisters in a brownstone in Bed-Stuy, one of the few areas where black people could live and move and own property. My mother was born and raised in Mount Olive, North Carolina, home of Mount Olive pickles. In her youth, my mother and some of her siblings worked at the pickle plant, and they packed pickles into jars by hand. Both sets of my grandparents, the Hendersons and the Elliots, were sharecroppers, which means they and their children also worked the land year after year, sold the crops to the land's owners at dismally low prices, and were never able to pay off their unrelenting debts that those landowners added to their accounts. Generation after generation, cheated of nearly everything they were owed, they pressed on, had children, raised those children, always longing for better and for more. Why? Hope. What else could they do but hope that things could be and would be better for their children and their grandchildren? My mother graduated from high school, and in the summer after her first year at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, she went to Brooklyn to stay with her brother and his wife so she could earn money to pay for college. While she was there that summer, she met my father. When they met, both of my parents were engaged to other people. My father told the story of taking my mother to the amusement park at Coney Island for their first date. When he went around the car to open the door and help her out, my father was an amazing gentleman, and she extended her hand to him so that he could help her out of the car. That's when he saw the engagement ring. In a very personal and somewhat sneaky way, both my mother and father were living out the title to this talk, Nevertheless, Hope. They were married less than a year after they met and had 4 children. I am the youngest and the only daughter. Neither of my parents were college graduates, but they had hopes for us that far exceeded the hopes they had for themselves. They were convinced that the future for their children, the future generations of their family, had to include college. Because of my parents' hard work, both of them at times working 2 jobs, I was able to go to college, Williams College, where I met my husband. Soon thereafter, we were married and had 2 children, Christiana and Daniel. For just over 20 years, I was a full-time, at-home, homeschooling mother. They were the best of times. They were the worst of times. I loved being with my children, and it was hard. I loved being able to teach them and think critically with them and travel with them and infuse them with curiosity and wonder and joy and laughter and hope. 2 weeks after our oldest child, Christiana, celebrated her 15th birthday on Saturday, November 15, 2008, on our way to do some volunteer work together as a family, we stopped at the library. And both kids, Christiana at 15 and Daniel at 12, went into the library to pick up some books that were on hold for them. When Christiana returned to the minivan, she said, "I knew it. I knew he would get this book for me. I just knew it." I said, "Christiana, I reserved that book for you." And the day only got more confusing from there. Later that afternoon, Steve called me from the pet store to ask me which dog food he needed to get. And as I explained to him where the bags were in the store, Christiana listened on the other line, back in the day when we had house phones with other lines. When I went downstairs, she was in the garage taking things off the shelves and putting them on the floor. When I asked her what she was doing, she said, "This is what you told me to do on the phone." I started to help her put it all back, but she ignored me and went into the house, leaving me to put everything back. By the time I got into the kitchen a few minutes later, she had emptied the refrigerator onto the kitchen island. When I saw that, I became furious. "What are you doing?" I screamed at her. Calmly, she replied, "You told me to take out everything red and blue." By the time we got her to the hospital that evening, she was talking about being pregnant with Leonardo DiCaprio's children. By the time we left her in the adolescent behavioral health unit late that night, her mania was absolute and terrifying, and she was screaming about not wanting to hear the voices anymore. We were heartbroken. Days and nights passed. She didn't sleep. She screamed and tore her clothes. She didn't respond to medication, and there was a lot of medication. The hospital learned the hard way that Benadryl did not make her sleepy. It wound her up. More days and nights passed, and nothing seemed to change. We were full of fear and questions. What would her future look like? What if this was how her mind worked or didn't work? What if she never came back to herself or to us? But we visited every day, twice a day. And one day during one of those visits, I remembered one of our favorite songs from one of our favorite CDs, one we had listened to over and over again in our minivan. That day when I arrived there to see her, she wasn't in her regular room. She was in a solitary confinement room. She was in rare form that day, yelling and screaming and tearing things and breaking things. I wasn't afraid of her, but I was afraid for her. The room she was in had only a mattress in it. There were no tables or chairs, nothing but a bare mattress on the floor, and she had managed to tear the cover of the mattress. When I went in, she allowed me to give her a gentle hug before she pulled away and began more of speaking about things I couldn't understand. I sat on that mattress, and as the tears emerged from my already weary and weepy eyes, I began to sing the song I had remembered. It was called, "I Have a Hope. I have a hope. I have a future. I have a destiny that is yet awaiting me. My life's not over. A new beginning's just begun. I have a hope. I have a hope." About halfway through the verse, she stopped her raving and she came and sat down next to me. So when I finished, I started again. She put her head on my shoulder, and then she slowly let her head rest in my lap. I stroked her head and I kept singing, and she nodded off to sleep. It didn't last long. She was soon back on her feet, back to her raving. The raging began again, and I had to leave. But we had had a breakthrough. I left that day with the initial bud of this talk taking root in my soul. Nevertheless, hope. With each passing day, she was able to remember more and more of the lyrics to that song, and gradually she did make her way back to us. I would leave every day with tears still streaming down my cheeks, but holding on to hope. After 2 hospital stays that totaled 31 days, she came home to us heavily sedated, markedly over-medicated, so much so that she could barely speak. She drooled. She couldn't control her hands, so I had to feed her. At the time, Christiana was taking private American and English literature classes with Ryan Welch. He was a teacher at one of Charlotte's private schools. Christiana had met him in summer school the summer before, and she loved his classes. Following the summer, she continued to meet with him one-on-one. I took her to a session with him soon after her release from the hospital. Remember, she couldn't write. She could barely speak, but she wanted to be there, and all she could do was nod and listen. And he taught her anyway, because he was that kind of guy. Later that evening, he called me and asked what was going on. Barely able to hold back my tears, I explained to him what had happened to our precious child. He responded by telling me stories about students from his previous school in Chicago. All of the students at that school were teenage moms. He told me about how hopeless they often felt and how convinced they were that they would never be able to finish their studies and graduate from high school. He told me to tell Christiana the same thing that he always said to his former students. I will hold on to hope for you until you can hold on to it for yourself. Needless to say, the tears flowed freely when he told me. I still weep when I think about how gently he cared for her. They are friends to this day, nearly 14 years later. That was a personal crisis of hope. It was not historical, transatlantic, or international. It was personal, and hope was profoundly personal during those days. Let's take a commercial break here so I can get myself together. Hope is what kept us going back to the hospital in 2008 and 2009. During that first manic episode, that year she spent Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's Day in the hospital. Hope is what kept us going back during 4 hospitalizations in the spring of 2016. 4 hospitalizations in 93 days, and yes, I was counting. Hope is what kept us praying and waiting and crying and demanding good care for her, even when we weren't sure if she would ever be well enough to come back home. I wish I could say that we never gave up hope for her, but that wouldn't be true. My husband and I took turns giving up. We took turns screaming and cursing and falling into despair. And also we took turns holding on to hope for each other when the other one just couldn't. We developed a shorthand exchange. I would say to him, "Steve, tell me again." And he would say, "It's going to be okay." Of course, neither one of us could guarantee that it would be okay, but hope kept us hoping. Hope kept us from being swallowed up in grief and despair and pain. Hope is what empowered Christiana to get her associate's degree at Central Piedmont Community College in Charlotte. Hope empowered her to graduate cum laude with a degree in sociology from the University of North Carolina in Asheville. And hope is what enabled her to gain full-time employment in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg public school system. I love this picture of her holding a book. Holding that book with a cover that looks just like her. In her book entitled Hope in the Dark, Rebecca Solnit reminds us that part of holding on to hope for the future is remembering the past. We need to recall the victories we've already won, even as we face ongoing battles yet to be fought. The world we know is a hot mess. War and rumors of war, tornadoes, floods, fires, earthquake, anti-trans laws, a former president indicted and arrested, climate crises, food insecurity in the nation with the most available food, people experiencing homelessness in a nation with more empty homes and apartments than there are people who need places to live, school shootings, mass shootings, too many mass shootings, and you could name dozens, hundreds of more crises, international, national, here in Cincinnati, back home in Charlotte, and behind the closed doors of our faith communities, workspaces, schools, and our homes. We are a hot mess. And we all struggle with this notion of holding on to hope, with sickness, with aging, with job insecurity, with natural disasters. It's all too much. It's too much. And that is exactly why we need each other. That's why we need gatherings like this. You need to hear stories. You need to tell stories. I need to hear stories. I need to tell stories. We all need to be reminded of what we have already come through in order to hold on to hope for what is yet to come. We need to be reminded of all that hope has helped us overcome in the past. Enslavement, Jim Crow, the inability for large swaths of our population to vote and marry the people that they love. I know what you're thinking, but Gail, this stuff is all still happening. There are still enslaved people in the world. Racism is still alive and well. There is, of course, the new Jim Crow. Anti-trans laws are on the rise. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, as are acts of violence against Asian people, Muslim people, Palestinian people, and anybody who is not white, male, hetero, and Christian. I will not and I cannot disagree with you, but what I can and will say is this. The work of freedom, of liberation, of justice, of love, the work of equity and reparations, of enfranchisement and of hope, that work is also on the rise. People like Sonia Renee Taylor are teaching us to not apologize for our bodies or our needs or our hungers or our strength in the face of systems that seek to keep us bound to fear and self-loathing. People like Cole Arthur Riley are teaching us that we can name our fears and worries and live courageously nonetheless. We can live in this here flesh and thrive. People like Lovey Ajayi Jones are teaching us that we can do better and be better. We don't have to put up with all the insults and all the attempts that are meant to keep us afraid. And we can live fully in our strength and boldness and bravery. People like Valerie Kaur and Jackie Lewis are teaching us that love, revolutionary, fierce love, is the answer to what is ailing us as a nation and a world. We don't need more weapons or more autocratic leadership. We need to see the pain and need and suffering in each other and recognize the pain and need and suffering within ourselves. And when we come to understand our profound need for love, then we have a chance for a better and brighter future. People like Tricia Hersey are teaching us about rest and how rest is a form of resistance to the system of oppression that seeks to crush us and break our spirits. People like my friends, Anthony and Tony Smith in Salisbury, North Carolina, they are a black husband and wife team who, along with other members of their faith community, are teaching and demonstrating the power that still resides in the hands and hearts of people to reduce violence in the black community in Salisbury, to take down the Confederate monument in the middle of their town. And now Anthony has chosen to enter the political arena as a member of the city council so that change can be more systematic. And all of their work is grounded and founded in hope. Hope that this current system is not all that it can be and all that it should be. Black lives still matter. Wall Street still needs to be occupied. Water rights still need to be protected. Schools and libraries still need to be funded. And hope keeps us dreaming and conspiring and working and fighting. Hope Hope gets us out of our beds and back at the computer for more letters to the editor, more grant writing, more proposals for better schools, and more expansive curricula and gun control laws and safety for our children, against all the odds and all the ways in which people have told us that such work is a waste of time. Hope moves us to action, planting trees from which we ourselves will not eat. But because we believe in hope, we work to feed and protect generations yet to come. We work because we hope that 12 generations from now, 400 years from now, people will look back at us and declare that we did not give up hope. And because of that, we worked so children and future generations would have an inhabitable planet to live on and reason to press on. As our pilgrimage of hope begins to come to its end, and before we make our way to our regular lives, I want you to join me in Spain for just a few moments. I went there for the first time in 1986. From the moment I arrived in Madrid that hot August afternoon, from the instant my feet hit the platform of that train station, I felt it to my core. This is home. I have gone back more than 20 times. I love it there. In the summer of 1990, I met a woman named Leticia, and we became instant friends. From 1990 until this past December, every time I've gone to Spain, I've stayed with her. She's been like a sister to me for all these years. This past December, after 4 years of not being able to go to the place where my soul finds rest, I finally went back. I stayed in an Airbnb this time because Leticia is now the single mother of 2 teenage sons. I've already put in my parenting time. Raised 2 kids of my own. I do not ever need to live with teenagers anymore. Anyway, I asked Leticia to find a good hotel where the 2 of us could spend the night. Good food, deep sleep, some time to reconnect. She booked us a reservation at a monastery in Valbuena, Ribera del Duero. It had been converted into a thermal spa with hot water pools and saunas and treatment rooms. One of the pools extended outside, so we sat under the stars with our faces cold and our bodies warm. The following morning, after a lovely breakfast at the hotel, not long after we began our 2-hour drive back to Madrid, she informed me that a friend of hers had recommended that we make a stop along the way in a little town called Peñafiel. Her friend said that we had to see the Plaza Mayor, the main square, because of its unique architecture. We made our way to that small, hilly town, parked in the first parking lot we came upon, and when we got out of the car, she pulled out her phone to consult the map that would show us how to walk from the parking lot to the Plaza Mayor. While she consulted her phone, I looked around. Across the street from the parking lot was a playground. No children, no people in view. Behind the playground was a long cement, cinder block, and brick wall. As I stared at it, this is what my eyes landed on. It took a few seconds for my eyes to adjust. Am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? Hope. There on a wall in Peñafiel, in a tiny town in Spain. Hope in huge letters in English. You all immediately came to mind as I had been thinking about this talk and thinking about hope for several months already. It made absolutely no sense for me to see hope there, but there it was. After seeing the lovely plaza, as we made our way back to Madrid, I saw that same word in those same enormous letters, apparently created by the same artist, not 1, not 2, but 3 more times. Each time it appeared on an abandoned shed or barn or the wall of another abandoned structure. At first, I was a little disappointed to see it again. That first time it felt so special, so sacred. But after seeing it 3 more times, I found myself looking for it. I found myself looking for hope along the way. That is my invitation to you today. I invite you, never stop looking for hope. In the moments when every thought feels like a rambling one and nothing seems to make sense, not even to you, when you feel like you have lost hope and you're subsisting on the hope that you're borrowing from others, that's when you need to raise your gaze. Look around, even in the places that feel abandoned. Keep your eyes open. Keep your ears open. Keep your heart open. Keep looking for hope, and look for hope to make a difference. I've seen hope make a difference in my daughter and bolster her determination to not let bipolar disorder control every area of her life. I've seen hope in my friend Dee, who has been wheelchair bound because of bone cancer. Recently, she walked 80 feet in physical therapy. Hope and hard work raised her to her feet after more than 18 months. I've seen hope in action in Salisbury, North Carolina, where my 2 friends and other black citizens are raising their voices and doing their work and bringing about change in that southern town with its brutal history. I've seen hope in action in Guatemala, where illiterate women are not only learning to read, but they're also teaching each other how to protect themselves from domestic gender-based violence and how to be entrepreneurs who can provide for themselves socially and financially. Look for hope. Look for it in a language you can understand, and images and words and phrases that resonate with you. Look for hope in abandoned and unexpected places, in lonely and scary places, because it's there too. Hope is there too. If hope could persist in the holds of slave ships, and in the cellars and swamps of the Underground Railroad, and in the towns and cities where lynchings happened by the hundreds and the thousands, if hope could exist and persist in isolation rooms, in adolescent behavioral health units, if hope can exist and persist in deserts and rivers and open seas populated by migrants in search of new ports of call and new places of refuge. Actually, let me rephrase that. Since and because hope has existed and persisted in all of those places, then you and I alone and together can hold on to hope in our day and our time, against all the odds stacked against us, in the middle of all that we are in the middle of, regaining and retaking ground that our predecessors and ancestors have already won in these weary years still, shedding sometimes silent tears still. We too, all of us, each of us, we too can claim and speak and declare, and more than that, we can live in and on and under the influence of hope. Not false hope, not groundless hope, not cheap hope, not dismissive hope, no. Muscular hope that knows what the future holds, but nevertheless is willing to work hard does not know what the future holds, but nevertheless is willing to work hard for a better future. Undaunted hope that sees the mountains in its path and nevertheless remains convinced that something better is possible. Expansive hope that looks beyond the narrow confines that despair creates and nevertheless insists on widening and deepening our imaginations about our future. Epigenetic hope that reminds us of how far we've come and invites us to keep going and to pay the hope forward. Yes, we must rest and recover and breathe and take care of ourselves in order to live this life and do this work. Nevertheless, hope gets us back up and keeps us looking forward and moving forward. Hope gets me up in the morning and reminds me that my father did not fight in World War II and move from South Carolina to New York City for me to give up now. Hope reminds me that I won't see the consequences in my lifetime, but I will not give up. Because in my children's lifetime, or my grandchildren, or yours, in someone's lifetime, what I do, what you do, what we do today will matter. Hope says that we press on, we march on nevertheless. That's what hope says. And that's what hope does. And so I thank you for taking this pilgrimage with me this morning. A pilgrimage that in some ways started 400 years ago in Africa, continued in America decades ago, Europe a few months ago, and back to this place here and now. When you leave this place, look for hope in actions and images and language that you can understand. And at those times when you don't see any signs of hope, share some of yours. And if there's ever a time when you just can't come up with any hope at all, think of this morning here at Knox Presbyterian Church. Think of this rambling, weepy lecture. Think of this moment. Think of me, Gail, Henderson-Belsito, lifelong dealer of hope. Imagine me sitting with you on a bare mattress, on a floor, singing. I have a hope. I have a future. I have a destiny that is yet awaiting me. My life's not over. A new beginning's just begun. I have a hope. I have this hope. On your worst day, in your worst moments, when it feels like you cannot speak or think or imagine anything other than the place and space in which you find yourself, my dear new Cincinnati friends, remember, believe, and know that I will hold on to hope for you until you can hold on to it for yourself. And if nothing else, if you remember nothing else at all, remember these two words: nevertheless, hope. Thank you.
Wow. Praise God for you, Gail, and for your presence with us. You have challenged us, and you have lifted us up, and you have told a real, on-the-ground story. You've shared with us timeless wisdom, and you have shared with us in vulnerability from your personal journey, and we are grateful. I know we have questions we want to ask Gail, and you'll take a few minutes to
Absolutely.
Have some conversation with us?
Sure.
Wonderful. My name's Adam Franchek. I have the pleasure of being one of the pastors here at Knox. I lost my name tag this morning. I hope I will find it. I'm going to walk around so that folks can hear your questions and so that Gail can hear them clearly. Who has a question they'd like to share with our speaker today? Somebody get the ball rolling. Wonderful. Maggie, yeah, let's go back here. Somebody's got to start.
That's right. That was truly wonderful and amazingly inspiring, and I hope we recorded it because I'd like to hear it again and again and again. But I do want to ask about both of your children, and how they are doing today?
Great question. Thank you for asking. So Christiana, as I said, is currently a full-time employee at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Public Library System, which is such an amazing step for her. Our son, Daniel, was a tennis player in college and is currently working as a tennis coach. And they both live in Charlotte. Christiana lives with us, and Daniel lives with his girlfriend in Charlotte. Somebody over there, you had a question? Okay. Oh.
It was the same question. Everybody wanted to know about your children. Where else can we go?
I will say this, if, as anyone might be thinking of a question. Oh, someone's got a question over here. When Christiana came out of the hospital that first time, and so her medication was made correct, and she was able, one of the first things we talked about was the fact that this story was not just for our family. And so we've always felt like this is a story. I have a lot of opportunity to talk to people, and we all deal with these kinds of things, right? But we don't talk about it. We don't put it out in front of each other. And so we just knew that we wanted it always to be an encouragement to other people, and so I certainly tell these stories with her full permission.
So Gail, when you've been through what you've been through and what all of us have been through in our own lives, how do you fit in anger and or resentment into this? Doesn't that sort of overwhelm these hopeful feelings that you have?
We have struggled, yes, we deal with anger, we deal with frustration. I mean, when Christiana was in the hospital that first time and we did not know what her future was going to hold, and I'm a person of faith, right? And so I took my Bible, and the youth heard this last summer, I took my Bible into Christiana's bedroom, and I got down on the floor, and I yelled at God. I said, I didn't make this up. You made promises that you would be with us. You made promises that if we prayed and asked that. I have absolutely dealt with anger. We still do. Christiana will never have children. That was her choice. But I would love to have had grandchildren through her. So yes, it makes me angry. And also, that's part of our human experience. And what we've worked really hard on, especially with her in times when she's been really down, is it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be angry and frustrated, and also we will be with you every step of the way. And so we take turns, like I said, we take turns getting angry, we take turns being frustrated, and we move on because we've seen her. We didn't know it was possible, but from where she was when she came out of the hospital at 15, now at 29, to be working at the library, a boyfriend of 5 years, doing all the things that she can do for herself, taking full control of her medication and doctor's appointments. It's a miracle that we are thankful for every day. And we're still pissed that it happened to her.
Hi, I'm Caroline Hanna, and I belong to an organization where there are absolutely almost maybe 0.5% to 1% blacks. Everybody else is white. And I just wonder, how do we go about integrating a group like that? There are many members here who are part of that same organization, and I think maybe they'd like to hear too. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think that one of the experiences I have had around this idea of integrating and bringing people of different racialized backgrounds together is that oftentimes what I hear is white people saying, why won't black people come be with us? And what if we turn that question around? What if we say, what are the black organizations that are doing similar things that we can go participate in? So we go out, white people go out into the community, get involved with what's already happening, show people in the black community, immigrant, whatever community you're hoping to integrate with, show them that you care by going there, and then invite them to come see what you're doing. But that first step is not necessarily they won't come be like us and with us, but how do we step out? And I think because I think what happens is when you build relationships, then you've got relationships that can grow and multiply and change in that way.
That's what's hard.
It is hard. It's hard work. Creating the kind of community that reflects who we are as humanity is hard. There's no getting around that. It's difficult. And if you think about it from whatever perspective you're in, whatever group you're in, if I'm in a space where 99% of the people look like me, I am very comfortable. And I'm expecting people to come into that when I know all these people. We all live in the same community, right? So it's hard work. And what is asked, and I've lived it in the Presbyterian Church, is I am expected to make the transition. I am expected to enter in and be like something that is not necessarily who I am, naturally and instinctively. So I invite people, lean into the discomfort of it. It's going to be hard and uncomfortable. Do it anyway, because that's what you're asking black people to do. So, yeah. But I think it's a great question. I think it's good to want to have a community that is diverse. So go make a black community diverse.
Gail, what was the catalyst that really made you start deeply thinking about hope? Was it your daughter, or did you really start deeply thinking about this before?
I have been a person of absolutely naive, unrealistic, inexplicable, unfathomable optimism since childhood. But I would say that, and I wouldn't even say that it was Christiana's illness, it was my father's death in 2001, which was really the first deep personal tragedy. My father was diagnosed with lung cancer, and he died less than a year later. And I just had, and that really was like, okay, Gail, what do you do from here? Like, don't fall into grief. I mean, I grieved, but don't stay there. How would my father want me to live? I think about my dad. He was a high school graduate in Lawrence, South Carolina. I thought about this when I was flying here yesterday. He would be so proud of me. Because he didn't have the chances that he made possible for me. And so that gives me hope, right? That I can think about where my father came from and what he went through so that I could do this and be this. But I've always been very hopeful. I always have, yeah, I mean, there are so many stories of illness and breaks and all kinds of things. I'm like, yeah, but this can't be it. And I think that's what has always been in me. This can't be it. This breakup with the first this can't be it. Didn't get into the school or right? Like, this can't be it. There must be something better. I said this to the group. We were having dinner last night as pastors. A friend of mine said when I was in seminary, every pastor only preaches one sermon. You might preach it from different scripture, you might put a different chocolate coating around it, but my sermon has always been hope. There's more to hold on to, there's more to hold on for.
I'm gonna pick up on what she said. Gail and I have been friends since 2007. And I was at her house the day before Christiana had her meltdown. And my first response when Gail told me was, I have to fly back to Charlotte. I was raised in Fort Thomas, so similar to Hyde Park. And Gail and I have had many racial discussions, and I have invited her, please call me out anytime. And one thing she said to me when my dad was a teacher up in Elyria, and I was saying, oh, you know, I heard this story where there was a black guy who was the janitor, and my dad was so nice to him, and they were friends, and, you know, kindness. And Gail said to me, but did he ever go to his house for dinner? And I was like, I don't think so. And that has stayed with me. Because really, when we think about integrating and trying to come together and doing these things, it can start with just sharing a meal. It doesn't have to be this big organizational, that's the goal, but when you share a meal, when you share a house, when you share chasing your son Daniel when he had a doctor's appointment that he didn't want to go to, and this was my first trip there, and he didn't come out of the school.
And I had to go chase him down and like literally drag him to the car.
And I had been there less than one day. But that's her point. Did you have a meal together? Your dad may have been the greatest man on the planet and friends with this black janitor, but they went their separate ways after school.
So grateful today because you have just opened my mind to this idea of
epigenetic
hope. And what I'm realizing is that you and all the story and the people that you've talked about have built an inner strength that is very passive in me.
That's what?
It's very passive in me. I haven't had the challenges in my life. So what's opened up for me in this conversation is you have an inner strength that has never been challenged in me. And I want to learn that from you. I want to understand what the habits of that are. What's the mindset of that? How do, we toss around, oh, let's be resilient. Oh, this is something different. This is something very different. So I am so grateful and hope we can consider and continue that conversation.
Yes.
What does that mean to me in every day of my life?
I think that's I love that phrase, the habits of hope, right? And so I go back to what Lisa was saying and what this woman was saying and what I encourage all of you to do. Put yourself in relationship with people who have to live that way. If you've never had that challenge, volunteer at a school, volunteer at a library, get to know someone who's learning English as a second language, right? Put yourself in relationship with people who have had to learn to live in ways that you have not had to learn to live. Because that's how you deepen that, you strengthen that muscle. You absolutely do. Yes, I like that though, Habits of Hope. That might be another talk title.
All right, if I can play the devil's advocate in church, I will.
Ooh.
So what about, tell us about your discernment from the standpoint of, is there ever, surely in different organizations or probably maybe less so with individuals, you have to make a discernment of when do I walk away, and how do you deal with that tension of do I hold on to hope within this organization? You talked about some towns, you talked about our country, you talked about other sort of institutions that have challenges. Is there ever a time when you make that discernment and you decide, I'm not going to put my efforts here, I'm going to put my hope over here?
My answer to that question is a quick yes. There are times when we walk away, and we also hold on to hope. I don't believe it's either or. I can be in a really tough job situation, and this situation is just untenable, or the principals or the new CEO is doing things that I absolutely fundamentally ethically disagree with, and I need to leave this place. And it is my hope that the next leader will be better. That I don't think we have to choose one or the other. But yes, absolutely there are times. And I also think that, as I said in my story with Christiana, and in life, we have relationships with people, spouses, ex-spouses, children, people we wish weren't our children, right? Like whatever that is. And we have these moments of like, I give up. I cannot imagine what it's like to have a child who's an addict, who comes into your house and steals your things or threatens you or has figured out how to use your credit card. I don't know what that feels like. I know what it's like to have a child who's struggling, right? But at a certain point, you have to cut it off, right? Like you got to cut off the credit card. You got to change the locks. Even as you hold on to hope that your child will get the help that they need. So I really don't believe it's either or. But there are definitely times when you just have to say enough is enough. Otherwise, I would still be enslaved. I would not be standing here. It's a both and.
I really needed to hear this talk today. And let me just say this. I have been struggling since the middle of the last decade with this growing sense of hopelessness or despair about the direction of the world, specifically the rise in this country and in many others of authoritarianism and basically neo-fascism. And there have been so many times where I'm fighting to keep my head above the water that I feel like I'm sinking beneath the waves. And you gave one very concrete suggestion of taking turns to hold on to hope, and that was very helpful. Are there other disciplines that you use that you have found helpful to try to pull yourself up onto a life raft when you're feeling that way? Because it's an ongoing struggle. And I doubt if I'm alone with that. And I'd just like to hear any other suggestions you have of ways of almost a spiritual discipline to call that up.
Yes. But first of all, thank you for saying that. I'm sure you are not alone in this room in feeling that way. The first thing that comes to mind for me is I'm a journaler. And as he mentioned in the introduction, very generous and kind introduction, I have hundreds of volumes of journals. And for me personally, I can sit in the room where I have so many of those journals on the shelves. And I can, in fact, here, I'm going to show you. I brought the journal that I was writing in when we took Christiana to the hospital. So I can go to my shelves and I can pull out a specific journal. And if I open this thing and start reading, I know I'm going to start crying. But I can look at this journal, I can look at all those journals on the shelves, and I can say, we survived every one of those things. I survived. I remember, I know this is going to offend people, some people, but I'm going to say it anyway. I remember on the night of the election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. My husband is a CNN addict. And he was up watching the election results, and I went to bed. I'm like, I can't. So I went to bed, and when I woke up in the morning, my husband was not in the bed. And I knew at that moment who had won the election. Because I knew if Hillary had won, he would have woken me up to tell me. And so I can go to my shelves. That was a difficult moment for us. It was probably not for everybody in this room. That was a difficult moment for us. But I can look at those shelves and all of the anxiety that came out of my husband at that point and that we were talking about and say, guess what? We are now in 2023. We got through that. I got through my father's death of lung cancer. I got through my own battle with breast cancer. So first and foremost, look back at what we've already won. And in some cases, we will have to refight the battles. There's this great book that I have finished, it's in that bag too, called Hope in the Dark. I mentioned it in the talk by Rebecca Solnit. I highly recommend that book because she looks back and says, we have won other victories. You talk about fascism and authoritarianism. Look at Guatemala. Is it hard there still? Yes. But they can look and say, we got rid of that dictator. We can say, right? So I think we need to remember what we've already come through. I think community makes a world of difference. We have been taught, again, we talked about this a little bit last night, this country and this society just tells us, do it on your own. Especially when you're not feeling right, when you're feeling depressed, when you're struggling, don't tell anybody. Only tell people about the victories. Got the job, saved $1 million, got the new house. Not, I got rejected from that job. My kid is really in trouble. My mother is dying of outright. Whatever the bad things are, we've been taught, don't tell anybody that. But that's when we need community the most, because that's when we are down, somebody else is going to hold on to hope for you. And you get to take turns. That's what's so beautiful about community. And guess what? You're never going to see that on the news. People were running out of hope, and they got together and had a picnic, and they were able to get back out there and keep doing the work. Now we go to commercial. You're never going to see that. But that's what's happening. That's what's happening. So yeah, it's hard though. It's really hard. But community and remembering, don't forget what you've already won.
Hi. I was with you at Montreat last year, and you brought up your father-in-law. How did that play? How did hope play in that relationship?
Ooh.
Sorry.
So, last year when I was doing this youth conference, and I did a talk, and I've learned about the importance of props. And so I had an empty chair on the stage, and I told the story of our wedding day. My husband is white. And I told the story of the beauty and joy of our wedding day. And I ran to the back of the stage, and I had a bouquet of flowers, and I came forward and I said, you know, it was a beautiful day, and I was so happy, and we stared at each other. We were so in love. And there was an empty chair because my father-in-law chose not to come to our wedding because I'm black. So there was a lot. Whoever asked the question about anger, there was a lot of anger there, a lot of resentment. That was a hard one for me with hope. Like, I hoped that he would come around, but I didn't see any evidence that he would, and he did not. To his death, he never did come around. But the hope did come in because it pushed me and Steve to a deeper commitment to each other and a deeper commitment to supporting our children no matter what. So we got married in 1991, so we're coming up on 32 years, which is insane. But we said on our honeymoon, jokingly, if we have kids and our daughter marries another woman and is smoking crack at the altar, we will be there. What I didn't know is I was going to have a bipolar kid who goes back and forth, you know. So anyway, and in all seriousness, it has given both of us a much deeper hope about the need for ongoing work around racial reconciliation. And I told the youth last summer, like, that left a scar and a mark on me that is still very real and very raw. And I hope that no other kid has to go through that. And I think about trans kids now who are being battered on every side. If it's not hard enough to understand yourself as a trans human being in your teen years, and now everywhere you look, you're being told you don't even get to go to the doctor. You don't get to participate in sports. You don't get to be who you are. Like, teenage life is not hard enough. Now the adults in the world are saying, and we reject you. We've got to do better, and we've got to hold on to hope for those kids and be available for them and be in community with them and their parents and their families as they face that. So, yeah, those kinds of real in-your-face bigotry, hate stuff, it can push you to despair. Or it can make you say, you know what, I'm never going to let this happen. In my strength, I'm never going to let this happen to anyone else. Thanks.
With confidence that Gail's going to stick around for a few more one-on-one questions as needed, let's take two more.
Thank you so much for your honesty and your beautiful talk today. One of the things about your story that resonates with me is your love of Spain. And I was wondering, and because I have my own love affair with France, and I've been studying French for a long time, do you speak Spanish? I was just curious.
Yes, I do. Hablo español muchísimo. Yeah, I spent 4 years as a Spanish teacher. But I will say this, and again, I get to say this because we're in a church and I'm a pastor. The ability that I have to speak Spanish is beyond what I studied. I mean, it really is a gift that God gave me that is beyond the pages that I turned. But yes, I do speak Spanish. I have friends in Madrid that I see and spend time with. I love that place. Like I said, it remains inexplicable, just arriving there. And at the time, I wasn't even fluent, but I knew I was at home. I knew it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I had a quick question for you concerning, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Institutional hope. You know, at a time when by every measure, American society is disillusioned, distrustful, and cynical about institutions and across the board, but specifically about the church. And I like the idea that you use muscular hope. How can the church exhibit muscular hope in a distrustful, cynical, disillusioned world?
How can the church exhibit muscular hope? Two things. One, the church is made up of people. And as people, as individuals, we need to be invested. We need to recognize the hope that lies in us, right? That in community, we can have people who say, I think the church is dying, and have other people say, oh, no, it's not, right? So there is that community, and so we need hope, I believe, in us individually as members of the church, as followers of Christ, if you are in a Christian church. And I say on top of that, so high above that, encompassing around, before, behind, is that if God is real, if the God that we say we believe is real and loves us and did not create us to be at war with each other, if that God is real and we believe in that God and we are empowered with that God, then I don't understand for the life of me how we could be hopeless people. I don't. We just celebrated Easter. Again, and I don't want to offend anybody who is not a Christian, who is not a follower of Christ, who thinks it's all a hoax. I get it. I'm not trying to convince you. It's not my job to save your soul. It's not. But for those of us who do believe that, if Jesus was born, if God came to earth in the form of a baby, came through the womb of an unwed teenage girl, and then lived, fed people, healed people, raised people from the dead, walked on water, calmed storms, and then was crucified, executed by the state, if that God died and was put in a tomb and then rose from the dead and has never been spotted, no bones have ever been found, what is wrong with us if we believe that? I don't see how we have a choice but to have hope. I don't see how we have a choice but to hold on, even when the world looks like it's going to crush us, to know the one who created the world is still on the throne. So that's the preacher, the preacher answer. And guess what? I love that y'all have a beautiful place here. But these walls, that magnificent sanctuary, that's not the church. We are. And we need to be that in the world. We need to be beacons of light and hope and telling people, listen, I don't get it. I don't know why my father-in-law couldn't deal with me. I don't. But that has not in any way, that doesn't change who I am. It doesn't change what I believe.
Well, that seems like a perfect place to leave things, doesn't it? That seems like a perfect place to not leave things, but to transition by reminding you that this preacher will be here at Knox Presbyterian Church again tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock for both of our worship services. We're grateful that she's spending time with our youth this afternoon. That will be a joy as well. All of this is possible because of what we call the Tom York Lecture Series. And that lecture series is endowed in memory of Reverend Tom York, who was pastor of Knox Presbyterian Church for 16 years. This lecture series is something that is meant to bring hope and thoughtfulness and intellectual engagement and conversation into the life of this faith community, and we are grateful. You may give to support the future of the Tom York Lecture Series, and you can do that by cash or check at baskets as you leave the room. You can also click on this QR code or go to our website and click on the Give Now icon, and that will help you to do something to support the continuation of this wonderful experience you have had this morning. And with that, we thank you for coming. We welcome you to hang around for some time of conversation. And let's one more time thank the Reverend Gail Henderson-Belsito.